Welcome to the Clayton Tyner podcast, where we do our best to reframe current issues through the lens of ancient wisdom. Today, we dig into the wild story of billionaire Bill Gates allegedly being blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein. We'll look at the media's obsession with LeBron even after his team gets swept, and why living in his shadow may actually be an advantage to the Denver Nuggets. Meanwhile, Netflix has really angered customers by reversing course on their lax password sharing policy. What can we learn from this in our own lives? And one more topic that definitely needs to be considered: medical assistance in dying. Is this compassion, or is it just murder by a different name? All of that on episode 19 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. Well, welcome once again to the Clayton Tyner podcast. I am Clayton Tyner. I'd love for you to follow me on Instagram or Twitter. And if you're new to the podcast, or if you've been watching for a while and you have not yet, do not forget to subscribe. You know, the cool kids on YouTube, they say, smash that subscribe button. I don't really know what that means. Like, stick your thumb through your iPhone screen, hit that subscribe button so hard, just destroy your computer mouse, smash it. And I've heard you should also hit the notification bell. That way, anytime a podcast comes out or new content comes out, you'll be notified so you can stay up to date on it. I'm so happy with how things are growing on the channel. Last week, we had crossed 200 subscribers. Now we've crossed 300. I like putting my goals out there publicly. My goal is by the end of 2023 to cross 1,000 subscribers. I think it's doable. It is going to take quite a bit of work. And I want every person who's watching and who has subscribed to know that I greatly, greatly appreciate that. Yesterday was Memorial Day. A day that sometimes it gets lost, the true meaning, because it's become kind of about barbecues and hanging out. Memorial Day is not Veterans Day. It's not where we just acknowledge everyone who has served. It is specifically when we remember and give our thanks to the people who have given the ultimate sacrifice of laying down their lives so that we can have our freedoms. I grew up an Army brat. My dad served in the Army for 25 years. His dad fought in World War II. And I always thought it was interesting growing up. My grandpa really would not talk about his time in the war. And as I got older, I came to understand that the weight of all that had been lost and the lives lost around him during that war, it was just too heavy for him to bear. And it's a good reminder that those who have served, and who have served especially in war, and who have witnessed the death of their friends and their fellow soldiers, they carry the weight of Memorial Day every day. And so it's a beautiful thing. And maybe a way to frame Memorial Day is this is an opportunity for all of us as a country to come alongside those who have fought and watched firsthand those who we are memorializing. It's an opportunity for us to come and, even just for one day, to help bear the weight of these people's memory and to give our thanks. And I think it's a healthy practice and something that we should take seriously as Americans, and probably just as a general rule for all people, to think about who came before and who laid the path that we're now walking on, and who gave us the freedoms we enjoy, and who provided us these conveniences and allows us to live the lives that we live, and to be really, really thankful for it. Well, with all that said, let's get into today's 3 points. Bill Gates is one of the first really famous billionaires. You know, everyone really knew all about him. There's been other famous wealthy people, or wealthy or famous because they're wealthy, like the Rockefellers. But Bill Gates has just kind of been this enigma all throughout my life, the Microsoft founder. And some people really love this guy. It seems increasingly more and more people kind of hate this guy. And he's been catching a lot of flack, especially for his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Jeffrey Epstein, I'm sure you know by this point, but he is a center of controversy. He has been the center of a conspiracy theory. I mean, I was hearing about this conspiracy theory as a kid, you know, that there are all these politicians flying over to this island, sleeping with, minors and stuff like that. Jeffrey Epstein was known as kind of this serial pedophile. And like most conspiracy theories, there was the majority of people who were like, come on, man. Like, really? There's a plane that all these famous people get on, all these politicians get on, and they fly to some private island where they, have sex with minors. Like, come on, really? like, get a life. That's not happening. It turns out that was happening, right? Like, Jeffrey Epstein was actually found guilty of, indecency with minors, some kind of charge quite a few years ago. And then obviously he was put into prison, and then he killed himself. So, we don't really know. It's like everyone's mad that there's this conspiracy that he didn't kill himself. But you have to at least be understanding that his whole life was a conspiracy theory that ended up basically being true. And what a lot of people have believed about the specifics of how Jeffrey Epstein operated, because it's very hard to understand where all of this money came from or what he even did for a living, is that he would just blackmail these people. He would get something on these celebrities, on these politicians, and maybe even he would create the blackmail, and then he would hold it over their head, and he'd leverage it for money and influence and power. And Bill Gates meeting with Jeffrey Epstein was a big deal, because he was meeting with him even after he had already been convicted the first time, like actually found guilty, and really got off almost scot-free, which unfortunately, in what seems to be a two-tier justice system, that often happens with people who are wealthy or famous. And so Bill Gates continuing to meet with him had definitely raised some red flags, and people wondered maybe he's compromised as well, because why else would this billionaire, who's all over the place and all over the news and is trying to, do all these things to supposedly end world hunger and stuff, why is he still like being seen with this guy and being in public with this guy? And it has come out now. It is all over the news that allegedly Bill Gates was being blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein, and we actually know the details of that blackmail now. And that really shines a terrible light on Bill Gates, because he's been all over the news. He's been asked about this so many times, and he always denies it. There was a really interesting clip just briefly after Jeffrey Epstein died, and they were asking about Bill Gates' relationship with him, and he said, "Look, it was just about, fundraising. We were never friends. I thought that he could help me raise money." Well, it turns out all of that is actually a lie, that Bill Gates had an affair with a bridge player overseas. Jeffrey Epstein found out about it, because apparently that's what he was good at, is getting dirt on people, and then leveraged it against Bill Gates. Now, to be fair to the situation, it appears that Bill Gates didn't, at least from the investigation at this point, didn't give into the blackmail, in terms of he didn't give him $1 billion. It doesn't really appear like he gave him a whole lot of money, if any at all. But at minimum, the blackmail did keep their relationship together. And it appears that Bill Gates would continue having these meetings with him from time to time to pacify him, in order for this story about his affair to not come out. And in one of these interviews, I mean, just kind of the creepiest thing, this went all over the internet. Bill is asked about kind of what lessons could be learned from Jeffrey Epstein's death. And here's that video.
Is there a lesson for you, for anyone else looking at this?
Well, he's dead. So, in general, you always have to be careful. And, I'm very proud of what we've done in philanthropy, very proud of the work of the foundation.
Well, he's dead, so you just have to be careful, says Bill Gates. Now, Bill is awkward. He's socially awkward, doesn't have the best social skills. So if we give him the benefit of the doubt, we can just say this was like a really, really inappropriately socially awkward moment. If you're just listening and not watching on YouTube, which, by the way, subscribe on YouTube, he says, well, he's dead, and so you should be careful, as he smiles, right? Hey, don't do that. That's wild. Especially now that we have the context that Bill Gates was being blackmailed by this guy. And so, yeah, like Jeffrey Epstein no longer breathing is kind of to his benefit. I'm not saying there's any connection there at all. It's just like, man, for years now, this guy has been holding this thing over your head. Now he's no longer. So the answer, he's dead. So I guess you should just be careful, is a very, very strange answer indeed. So how do we think about this? And before we're too harsh on Bill Gates, which is very easy to do, what does that look like to get blackmailed? And this is something that is actually happening to people more often these days, as more and more of our lives are being put out for everyone to see on social media. More and more people are coming under, blackmail, being extorted. I've had quite a few friends whose kids have come under some version of this, where bad actors online will either pull something out of a conversation, or they will kind of groom them to send them a slightly inappropriate picture. And once they have it, then they will start saying, I need $100. If you don't send me $100, I'm going to show your parents this. I need $500. If you don't send me $500, I'm going to send this to everyone on your friends list. This is happening all of the time, especially in our culture of sexting. This is even happening to adults, where someone gets tricked into sending a nude picture to someone that they've never met before on Snapchat or wherever else. And all of a sudden they have you, and they will extort you, and they will blackmail you, and they will hold this thing over your head. And so the blackmail part of it is obviously just atrocious. The fact that this is apparently how Jeffrey Epstein operated and moved about the world, and this is how he chose to, spend his life. There's all kinds of ideas that he was some kind of operative for some spy organization. I don't know. What I know is it seems like he was an expert at extorting people. And that's a terrible way to live, and it's a terrible thing to do to people. In the book of Wisdoms, Proverbs 11, it says, the integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Blackmail is duplicity. Extortion is duplicity. And Jeffrey Epstein eventually was destroyed by his duplicity. And it's the integrity of the upright that guides their life. It's the integrity that keeps them on a higher plane. It's their integrity that allows them to move about the world without having to blackmail or extort. And we have to be really careful about this, because it's easy to point at Jeffrey Epstein, someone who's literally going out of their way to dig up dirt or put people in compromising positions. But we use emotional blackmail a lot, especially when we're living as victims in our life. And, what's really sad is we normally do this to the people that we love the most, our spouses, maybe even our children. As children, we try to do this to our parents. Emotional blackmail is when you know someone better than anyone else knows them. And so you leverage the parts of their life or the parts of their story or the things that hurt them the most in order to get your way, or in order to make them feel bad, or in order to guilt trip them. And so we can extort as well. And maybe that seems like it's on a much smaller level. The fact that you bring up a difficult part of someone's past in order to try and get your way in a situation. When you say, you always do this, you've always been this way, you're acting just like your dad, you're behaving the same way you did in your last marriage, or all of those things are emotional blackmail. It's hard because life is hard, and it's hard to get your way. And so we're always looking for leverage points, but oftentimes those leverage points can dovetail into extortion or blackmail. And the duplicitous, those who use those kinds of means, are ultimately destroyed by it. And so make sure you inventory your own life. I've got to inventory my own life and make sure that I'm not using these minor forms of blackmail, because it's not Jeffrey Epstein, and we're not controlling all of the celebrities, actors, and politicians in the world with our extortion. But we can be hurting people, and it is a lack of integrity. And so blackmail is obviously terrible. You should make sure that you're not doing it, even at this microscopic level. But what about Bill Gates in his position? How do we avoid putting ourselves in position to be blackmailed? And if we do end up in a situation like this, because we are all sinners in need of grace, and we all screw up, man. And so what if someone does find something against us and leverages it against us? How should we act? In Psalms, this beautiful book of poetry, chapter 25, it says, guard my life and rescue me. Do not let me be put to shame, for I take refuge in you. May integrity and uprightness protect me. May integrity and uprightness protect me. It's interesting because when we think of ideas like integrity, these virtues in our life, when we think of living an upright life, something where all of our deeds are done in the light, everyone knows what's going on, everyone can trust us. When we think of that, we don't usually think of that as protection. But in the Psalm, it says, may integrity and uprightness protect me. That these things are actually like shields. And what are they shields against? Well, they're shields against things exactly like this, exactly like blackmail, exactly like extortion, exactly like someone trying to use your actions or your transgressions as a point of leverage in order to begin directing your life, or making you say things you don't want to say, or do things that you don't want to do. I mean, it's kind of simple, but if you live an upright life and a life that is full of integrity, then there's nothing for anyone to blackmail you with. And man, it's like we should be living with the end in mind. If you are a faith-based person, a spiritual person, if you're a Christian, you should be living to honor your God and to walk in his ways. But honoring God and obeying God, it always has incredibly practical benefits for us as well. Something I say a lot in my role at MetaChurch as the pastor there is the deepest spiritual things are also the most deepest practical things. They're deeply practical. They just play out in your life. And so you live a life of integrity, then there's nothing for anyone to leverage against you. There's a great scriptural injunction for our lives. It shows up in a lot of places. Here in the book of Philippians, it says, "You will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation." This term, above reproach, it's the picture of someone leveraging an accusation against you, and everyone who knows you or even knows about you or has heard anything about your reputation, as soon as that accusation is leveraged, above reproach is the picture of everyone going, "There's no way." Like a lot of people would do that, but she would not do that. Like, I know that's common in this crooked and perverse generation, but you're going to have to bring the receipts because there's no way. That's a life of integrity. That's a life that is above reproach. Above reproach means you can handle false accusations because your character is so impeccable that it's going to take like a full trial for people to actually believe you did it. You truly will be innocent until proven guilty, not just in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of your peers, because your reputation and your past, it speaks for itself. And if you are living above reproach, which is not a PR stunt, it's not something that you sculpt around yourself. Above reproach is actual and factual. It's how you are living. It's the way you're navigating your life. It's keeping your deeds out in the light for all to see and making sure that nothing is hidden. When you live above reproach, you can't be blackmailed. You can't be extorted. The Greek philosopher Epictetus, which I didn't know a lot about. Apparently, he was actually born into slavery. He was finally like abandoned somewhere else, and just over time became this incredible philosopher. He says, "No man is free who is not a master of himself." And again, that's significant because he was born into slavery. He knows what it means to actually not have your freedom and still have the freedom of mastering yourself. No man is free who is not a master of himself. And Jesus said, "Truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is the slave of sin." And that is a spiritual truth that you will become enslaved to your sin. The more you sin, the more you lose your volition. The more you lose your volition, the more your addiction takes over. The more your addiction takes over, the more you let go of your will. The more you let go of your will, the more you're just like an animal operating off instinct. You will actually become enslaved to your sins. You'll become enslaved to your addictions. You'll become enslaved to pornography. You'll become enslaved to lying. And all of a sudden, you know, in your pride or your lust or your overspending, the way that you manage your money, if you sinfully manage your money, then you won't own your money will own you. You won't own your words will own you. You won't own your relationships will own you. Everyone who commits sin is a slave of sin. And the more you sin, the more you become enslaved. And so what do we do? Because we're all screwed up and we've all done things that if everyone knew about them, man, we would not know what to do with ourselves. And maybe there are text messages on your phone right now that if they were made public, you wouldn't know how to go on living. Maybe there are, sites that you consistently visit, relationships that you're in, ways that you're spending your money or ways that you're gaining other people's money. There are relationships that happen that, man, if they came to light, just like Bill Gates, he had this affair and he did not want Melinda to find out about it. Seems to be the story between him and Jeffrey Epstein. So what do we do? How do we live with integrity when we have screwed up, when we've given people opportunity to use something against us? And the answer is obvious, but the answer is painful. And most people won't do it. And even multi-billionaires like Bill Gates struggle to do it. And they just continue to lie and dig themselves a hole. The answer is you become a master of yourself. You take back your freedom by bringing what's in the dark into the light. And I love this verse in James. James was the half brother of Jesus. He wrote one of the books of the New Testament. He says in James 5:16, "Therefore confess your sins to one another and pray for one another." And it's so interesting what he connects to this. It doesn't say so you'll be forgiven. It doesn't say so you'll get to go to heaven someday. He says confess your sins to one another so that you may be healed. And I believe this. I actually believe this on a physical level. I believe this when it comes to our mental health. And I think this is the prescription for if there is something that someone is leveraging against you, some hidden sin, some hidden offense. As hard as it will be to come public with that, to confess that, that is the answer to actually being healed, to being restored is another way to interpret that, to be made whole, to be saved. Come forward with it. And the things that are hidden in your life, they kill you. They kill your relationships. They kill your mental health, and they actually kill you. A lot of what we diagnose as anxiety are things that we're hiding in our life. Now, there is real clinical anxiety, and I don't pretend to understand all of that. But a lot of people who deal with everyday anxiety, it's because something's hidden. And a lot of it is hidden in their iPhones, in their pockets, and they're carrying their anxiety around with them. And the anxiety is, what if this was found out? And the answer is, if one person found out, they could put a chain around your life and jerk you around wherever they wanted you to go. They could extort you. They could blackmail you. If the people that you love found out, it would damage your relationships. If your work found out, you might lose your job. And so confess your sins. You become the master of yourself. You get ahead of it. You bring it into the light. And by doing that, you will have to face the music, and it will be very difficult, but you will take back the God-given authority that you have to actually be in some level of control of your own actions and your own life. And now is the time to do it. And the longer you wait, the harder it will get. So live above reproach and live a life of integrity. And a life of integrity doesn't mean you never mess up, but it does mean when you mess up, you take the ownership, you come forward, you confess your sins to one another so that you may be healed. You know, this whole thing with Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein, it's back in the shadows. It's hidden. And I'm going to talk about a different kind of shadow. Recently, the Lakers were swept in the Western Conference Finals by the Denver Nuggets. And the Lakers are flashy. They're the Showtime Lakers, and they have LeBron, who is the biggest name in basketball and possibly the biggest name in sports. And the Nuggets are kind of boring, right? Denver is a bit of a small market team. Their star player, Jokic, he is like, he's actually really funny and really amusing, but he's not on social media. He doesn't give these fiery interviews. He's not on like any commercials. He doesn't have signature shoes, I don't think. He doesn't have any of this stuff. He's just already kind of living in the shadows of the NBA, but he's a multiple-time MVP award winner. A lot of people think he should have won the regular season MVP again. He just won the Western Conference MVP, and odds are he's going to win the championship this year unless Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat are able to do something about that. So, the Nuggets just swept the Lakers, which if you're not familiar with that vocabulary, that means that they beat them 4 games in a row, which is very, very difficult to do. It's difficult to sweep a team. The series are best of 7, first to 4 games win. They just won game, and it was over. They humiliated LeBron and the Lakers. But the most interesting thing happened. In the press conference right after they were swept, LeBron took back control of the narrative. He kind of hinted that he might retire, even though most sources close to him think there's no way he's going to retire. Anyway, all of a sudden, for the next, 48, 72 hours, the next week of coverage, no one is talking about the Nuggets, who've had this historic season, best team in the regular season, best team in the playoffs, just swept LeBron and the Lakers, and no one's talking about them. They're only talking about LeBron. And I wanted to share this clip. I thought Charles Barkley had a great perspective on this, talking about all the attention that LeBron is getting.
I was disappointed he brought that up in the Nuggets highlight of their organization. They'd never been to the finals. They just swept the big bad Lakers. Nobody's giving them any respect.
But do you think he did it strategically, Charles? Because LeBron is very calculated.
Yes. Because them fools on ESPN were going to talk about it. Like they're still talking about it. It's funny. I actually turned my television off the next day because the first 2 blocks were all about LeBron instead of what the Denver Nuggets has accomplished. I mean, you think about it. They got to.
I love Charles Barkley. Man, he is just one of the best commentators on the NBA. He always says what he's thinking, and he was absolutely right. And even in this interview, they opened up wanting to talk about LeBron. And his point is, why aren't we talking about the Nuggets? Why aren't we talking about this historic season? And the truth is, the Nuggets are living in LeBron's shadow. And a lot of the NBA is living in LeBron's shadow. And, no shade on LeBron. I mean, he is and has been the best player in the NBA for many years now. Now, we all know It's not the greatest of all time. That's Michael Jordan. Okay, so let's not get crazy. Let's not get crazy, LeBron fans. It's still Michael Jordan. It's the greatest of all time. Fight me. He has been the best player for a long time. He's got a lot of championships. He's been to the finals a whole lot. Now he's lost a lot of those finals, which again, Michael Jordan never lost a final. So, and he's played for 20 years and he scored more points than anyone else. Michael Jordan only played for 13 years and still put up incredible numbers. So I digress about Michael Jordan. People are living in LeBron's shadow. That is what's happening. And it's got to be frustrating. I mean, just feeling like all of your effort and all of your work isn't really amounting to much of anything. And here's my encouragement, because this doesn't just happen to famous NBA players. This happens to regular everyday people like you and like me all of the time. You feel like you're doing your absolute best work at your job right now, and nobody seems to notice because you're not in management, or because one of your other employees causes so many problems that they get all of the attention and no one's seeing your good work. Maybe you are in the dating world and you know you have a lot to offer. You're a great guy. You're a great woman. And you just seem to get passed up. You know, maybe you're trying to hold to some more traditional values, and you're not wanting to just hook up on night number one, which if that's you, kudos to you. And you know, you're not wanting to just meet people at the club. You're wanting to actually meet people in the flow of life. Or real crazy thought, you might want to meet them like at church or something like that. And you're just struggling, and it feels like you're getting passed up, and you're looking at the other friends that you had in high school, and they just seem way ahead of you, and they're doing things the wrong way. But man, at least they're going out on dates. At least people are swiping right. At least they're getting connections. At least they're getting attention. It's really easy to feel like we are living in the shadows, the business that you're trying to start. You know, man, I can feel that way a little bit trying to build this YouTube channel. I mean, it's like in one moment I'll be like, oh, we passed 300 subscribers. Like we're on our way. And in the next moment, it's like, man, like we are, this channel right now is just in the very bottom of YouTube subscriber count, you know, all of these massive behemoth, you know, huge YouTube channels that are putting out these numbers that are absolutely insane. How do we continue to find encouragement and passion and move forward when we don't feel like we're getting the respect that we deserve, when we just feel like we're living in other people's shadows, overlooked, taken advantage of? I've always said, and I've been guilty of it as a leader myself, the people who do the best work the most consistently are the easiest to overlook. So the people who are like always on time and they always turn in their assignments, they always knock it out of the park, oftentimes they get the least amount of attention from leadership because they're easy to take for granted. You know they're going to show up and do their work, and you're busy chasing around, giving all your time and energy and all of your energy to these people who are, you know, failing consistently or really struggling or not upholding the culture. So how do we do this, and what does this actually look like? And it reminds me of a very famous story in Scripture, a story that most people are going to be quite familiar with. We read about it in 1 Samuel 17. It says, now David was the son of the Ephrathite from Bethlehem of Judah named Jesse. And Jesse had 8 sons, and during Saul's reign was already an old man. And Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to war, and their names were Eliab the firstborn, Abinadab the next, and Shammah the third. And David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest had followed Saul. But David kept going back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock in Bethlehem. And so David is overlooked and he is overshadowed. And we see this later in the story of when Samuel goes and anoints the next king of Israel, because it's going to come from this very family, from Jesse's family. And earlier in the story, they don't even bring David into the house. You know, Samuel's like, let me see your sons, to Jesse. And he looks at the oldest and he looks at the second oldest and he goes through 6 of the sons. And God's like, it's none of them. And David is so much in the shadows, he's not even invited to the party. He's just like out watching the sheep. And so here he is once again, he's being left out. He's in his big brother's shadows, and he goes to, you know, show up and see what's going on. And when he gets there to the battlefield, there is this giant of a man named Goliath. And every day Goliath is coming out and he's challenging to go one-on-one with someone from Israel's army. And whoever wins the whole war. And this is something that armies historically would do. And David spoke to the men who were standing with him. He said, what will be done for the man who kills that Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Just who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And so the troops let him know, you know, what's going on, man. If anyone actually kills this guy, he'll be given the king's daughter, you know, have all of this honor. And And David is like, man, I'll do this, let me at him. Now he's a kid. He's like prepubescent. He's 12 or 13 years old, and he's just so insulted by this guy who's standing against these armies. And he's been living in the shadows, and he doesn't even necessarily seem all that upset about it. But this is his moment to step into the spotlight. And Saul heard about this, but when he met David, he's a kid. So Saul replied, you can't go fight this Philistine. You're just a youth, and he's been a warrior since he was young. And David answered Saul, your servant has been tending his father's sheep. Whenever a lion or bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after it, I struck it down, I rescued the lamb from its mouth. If it reared up against me, I would grab it by its fur, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed lions and bears, and this Philistine will be like one of them, for he's defied the armies of the living God. And then David said, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. And this is the story of David and Goliath. And David goes out, and he actually does have the advantage. And that's what people don't understand about the story of David and Goliath, is it seems like it's so improbable that this is going to work. But everyone is expecting hand-to-hand combat, sword and spear. And David has a different approach. He's a little guy, and he's protecting these sheep like they're made out of 24-karat gold. And so he doesn't necessarily fight hand-to-hand combat with all of these wild animals that are coming. He learns to be the expert of all experts with a slingshot. And that's what he pulls out. He pulls out the slingshot, 5 smooth stones. Turns out he only needed 1 in the chamber. He takes out Goliath. His story begins. He's the future king of Israel. It's an amazing story. All of that time in the shadows. Remember, the prophet comes to anoint a king. David is left in the shadows, standing in the shadows of his big brothers. But in the shadows, he's working. And in the shadows, he's taking on the lion, and he's taking on the bear. In the shadows, he's building his skill set. He's leveling up his courage. There's other things happening in the shadows. We learn about David. He became a musician. He's got a lot of downtime in the shadows. He learns the harp, and he can play it like no one else. And eventually that puts him in the king's quarters because Saul's having these nightmares, and no one knows how to soothe them. And somebody hears this little shepherd boy who is like, playing crazy solos on the harp. And now all of a sudden he's in another point of contact with the king. All of these ways that God is using his time in the shadows to prepare him to actually be the king of Israel, a man after God's own heart. And this is a familiar story in the scriptural canon. We have leaders like Moses, who was supposed to be killed as a child. His mother courageously saves him. He ends up being raised in the palace of Egypt. He is a Hebrew who is being raised by the palace that is enslaving all of the Hebrews. He's in the shadows. Nobody really knows about him. And then he goes even deeper into the shadows when he runs away from Egypt and spends like 40 years in the desert tending sheep. We see this again and again. Joshua, who eventually is the successor to Moses. One of my favorite verses in scripture, it says that Joshua never left the tent. What was the tent? The tent is where the Spirit of God hung out. The tent is where the scriptures were being written. The tent is where he would sit and meditate in the presence of God. Joshua wasn't always this big, outspoken, crazy leader. He was comfortable in the shadows. The Denver Nuggets, small market team. They've just been living in the shadows. My team, the San Antonio Spurs, small market team. For years and years, they just stayed in the shadows and racked up 5 championships and 20 winning seasons. There's power in the shadows, but you have to keep heart. You have to stay encouraged. The work that you do in the shadows is what builds you into a champion. And I don't often do this, but I'm going to give some flowers to Lebron, because LeBron's story started in the shadows. LeBron's dad dipped out when he was pretty young. He was raised by a single mom. And his earliest years, he was brought in by a coach who became a father figure to him. His earliest years were spent grinding away in the gym before anyone knew his name. And all of a sudden, now it was like middle school. I mean, he blew up real early. But all of a sudden, people see this talent. And yeah, he's like magnificently physically gifted. I mean, he is a specimen. He's an Adonis, but he did the work in the shadows. He came prepared. He showed up as the number 1 pick with all the expectation of the world on his shoulders. And he actually held the weight. And so if you're in a shadow season right now, you're being overlooked or taken for granted. Things aren't going your way. Things aren't moving as quickly as you would want them to move. And I've been in those seasons. I'll tell a quick story. When we were in quarantine, we had 2 locations at our church. None of them could meet. We were renting all of our locations. A lot of it was not even in our control. And when we could finally meet, man, I just thought we were going to have record attendance. We were going to grow, explode. All these people have been sitting hopeless in their homes. Surely they're going to run back to the light of the gospel in their local church. And man, I was beyond wrong. We came back with about 25% of our pre-COVID attendance. And even a couple years later, we still aren't back to pre-COVID attendance. And God has done so much. We just continued to work in the shadows. And I had the encouragement of mentors above me and leaders above me and elders and overseers above me, and the encouragement of a team around me who decided we were going to keep our hand to the plow and we were going to keep working, and that maybe God is using this time as like an incubator to get things in us that we need, strengths, skill sets, vision, worldview in us that we need to move forward. And in the shadows, he can get stuff out of us, the worst ways, the broken ways of thinking, the false narratives, the habits. He can get things out of us. And that's what can happen in the shadows. If you hold the faith and you believe that there is something for you, is you can be Jokic and the Nuggets, overlooked and underrated, and just grind and grind year after year, getting better and better, and now be in a position where you're the favorite to win the championship. The work you do in the shadows is what builds you into a champion. And so trust God in the shadow seasons. Trust God when you're being overlooked. Continue to allow him to build these things in you. Continue to allow him to speak to you. Be open to taking inventory of your life and seeing the skill sets and strengths that you're missing, and go after those and pursue those and get as healthy and powerful as you can possibly be, and be willing to get some stuff out of you, some broken thoughts and broken habits, broken rhythms in your life. The things that happen in the shadow is what builds you into a king. It's what builds you into a champion. I want to talk about Netflix making this just massive, massive change. It kind of has the internet in an uproar. Netflix, back in 2017, they put out a tweet specifically about whether or not people should be sharing their passwords with others. And the famous tweet says, "Love is sharing a password. Love is sharing a password." In other words, look, we're Netflix, man. We're cool. We're not like your mother's video rental store, where you just have to turn it on time or you're going to get a late fee. We're Netflix. We're super chill. Like, you want 25 people to have your password and all use your Netflix account? Go for it. That was 2017, and it stands in really stark contrast to what is now happening, which is quite different. Now, Netflix is putting in place policies, and the point of the policy is to keep people from sharing their passwords. They are no longer okay with people just kind of willy-nilly letting other people have access to their accounts, having like 45 different little squares of people who are all using it in different parts of the world. And they're going to crack down on this. And apparently the way they're going to do it is, if you're sharing your password with other people, they're not necessarily going to come in and block it or shut you down. They're just going to charge you for it. And a lot of people see this as hypocrisy, and they see this as inconsistency. It reminds me of something Jesus said. He said, "Let your yes be yes and your no be no." In other words, be consistent. And the problem is, as humans, we are like inconsistency machines. We are just rarely ever consistent with almost anything that we do. And so this is no different. We are just inconsistent. We're inconsistent people. We want to do something one day and we don't want to do it the other, even on the smallest things. Like, how many times has a new body style of a car come out and your very first thought was, "I hate that"? And then the car becomes more ubiquitous. You start seeing it on the road all of the time. And 3 weeks later, you're like, "I'd really like to drive one of those." It just happens so fast. We're just inconsistent. We meet someone and we're like, I do not like this person. I don't get good vibes. 4 months later, they're your very best friend. We're just inconsistent. One of the issues is that social media exists, to me, almost exclusively to highlight our inconsistencies, because we're going to tweet everything that we're thinking and everything that we're doing. And I want to kind of try to dissect exactly what happened, because I think that the problem at Netflix, the thing that people are a little bit frustrated about, is a problem of scale and a problem of consistency. When Netflix tweeted this out in 2017, they were a massive company, but not as massive as they are today. And from the beginning, something I've appreciated about Netflix is they've really sought to build a very different type of company. It was like famous that back in the day, they had a vacation policy where there was unlimited vacation. Like you could take as much vacation as you wanted to. There was actually a minimum requirement. You had to take a certain amount of vacation. And then several years later, they kind of reversed that when they had some new leadership. And now they've kind of reversed the reverse and landed in a happy medium where they still have an incredibly flexible policy. And all of those are cultural things. They want to build a different kind of culture, somewhere where people love to come to work, somewhere where people feel served and flexible and empowered and trusted and all of those things. And that's where you get a tweet like love is sharing a password. Do your thing. We're not just all about money, man. We want to spread Netflix and good content. And now they're like, actually, we do need some of that money. So we're going to charge you if you share your password. I am also trying to build a culture at MetaChurch where we have a staff who loves to come to work. And we try to evaluate that all the time. We say at the level of the board who oversees MetaChurch, people's lives should be better because they work here. Anything that we can reasonably do to make people's lives better for working here, we should do it. If we can do it, we should do it. And so that's where we stand on those things. At the same time, fortunately for me, people have gone ahead of me, like Netflix, like Google, like a lot of people who tried to create these really cool, fun cultures and work environments. And what I noticed is that while culture always can scale, like you can have this great culture at the core and the values that guide you, your policies often cannot scale. Culture can certainly scale, but policies often cannot scale. And what that created in us who are helping to lead MetaChurch is an approach where we always try to stay humble. Jesus said, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And part of what we do on social media is we speak in absolutes, and we should learn from Star Wars that only Siths speak in absolutes, which is kind of confusing because the Jedi say that, and that is an absolute statement. So they're saying you absolutely shouldn't speak in absolutes, which is a little bit of a quandary or a paradox. But regardless, we speak in absolutes, and we speak a lot of times from a position of pride. Love is sharing a password. This is who we are. This is what we're about. We're not like these other people. And the way that we've tried to do this at MetaChurch is through a lens of as much humility as possible. And so we actually have at MetaChurch an unlimited vacation policy. It's one of the things that I learned from people like Netflix. But the way that we talk about it in our employee handbook and the way that we communicate about it when we're talking about it in staff settings is we always say, for now. For now, we have an unlimited vacation policy. And if someday that doesn't serve what we're doing at MetaChurch, then we will change it. Now, if we were to ever change it, we would also try to find something that still fits the culture, because culture can scale even though policies can't always scale. Right now, I have a complete open door policy. Anyone on my staff who wants a one-on-one meeting with me can have a one-on-one meeting with me anytime they want, and I will do it really quickly. At my previous church, I think in my direct report chain, there was around 45 people. I had to have a little bit more structure than that, or else I would never get sermons written. And so that is a policy that potentially can't scale. Now, we might have 10 staff members forever, and I can always do that. And that would be great for me to always have that much access to everyone that I'm working with. But the culture behind it, the culture can scale if you can think that way and if you can be creative. But you have to approach these things with humility. And so with all of our policies, and especially the ones that are a little bit out of the box and that are helping to at least set the foundation of who we're trying to be as a culture, we have to try and be humble, because humility protects us from highlighting our inconsistencies. And I'm talking about this on the organizational level, but this happens in your life as well, because we often say things from a position of pride and we speak in absolutes. And when we're young, we say, oh man, I am never going to do that. And this is like, a tale as old as time, where you're a kid and you say, man, when I'm a parent someday, I'm never going to do X, Y, or Z that my parents do. And then just wait, because you're going to have kids and you're going to literally turn into your parent. You're going to literally turn into your mom, and it's going to slap you in the face. Like, Oh my gosh. And it's like every 30-year-old calls their parents and is like, I was an idiot. You were right about everything. I am so sorry. Because we speak from pride and we're inconsistent beings. When I was 18 years old, my college roommate and I, we had this song, and it was somewhat joking, but it was also quite prideful. And it was like our theme song, and it was a country song. And we just had all these aspirations and all these dreams. And the core of it was, we're not getting married, and for sure we're not getting married anytime soon. Like, we're going to be single guys. We're going to make a lot of money. We're going to have a lot of fun. And why would we get married? Because that's just the old ball and chain, and we don't want any kids. And so this song, I don't even know who it's by anymore. But it says, I've learned my lesson, and here's what it is. They all want a wife and a couple of kids, and right in the middle is where they want me. But I'm never gonna get married. That was the song. I'm never gonna get married. That was when I was 18. When I was 19, I met Katie and her 2 kids. Fell in love. Courted for 3 years. 22, 4 years later, after like blasting this song, like, that's it, man. You know, at 18, I'd gone to college to play basketball. I was married to the game, bro. You know, I was like, man, if I get married, I'll be 40 or 50, you know. I'm going to do this whole like get married late thing, just this immature thought. 4 years later, I'm married and have 2 kids. We are inconsistency machines. Luckily, when I was 18, you know, social media wasn't just everywhere. We weren't all sharing all of our thoughts with each other all the time. And so I would just suggest humility. I would suggest that if you're 8 or 18 or 28 or 38, you have no idea who you're going to be in 5 years. You have no idea what you're going to think in 10 years. You are going to grow, and hopefully you're going to mature, and your thoughts are going to change, and you're going to meet different people, and God's going to move you into different seasons. And so humility protects us from highlighting our inconsistency. And so you can say, you know, where I'm at in life, I just can't imagine really getting married anytime soon. That's a statement that is clothed in humility. It just leaves room open. We can say we're going to have unlimited vacation here in this organization for as long as it makes sense for us and actually serves our purpose and serves our culture. And if someday it doesn't, then you make those changes. We have a lot of benefits. You know, we try to just make people's lives better. And when we introduce them, we always say, we're doing this for now, and we hope we can do it forever. But if something changes or this doesn't serve the organization anymore, then we're going to have to change course. And we just try to clothe everything in humility so we can let our yes be yes and our no be no. And if you speak in terms of humility, the other thing that it does is when you actually know you have conviction around a subject, when you really say yes or you really say no, when you have your non-negotiables, people will believe you because you've been consistent over time. But if you're always inconsistent, you're putting all your thoughts on social media, and so you have a paper trail of inconsistencies, people are going to have a hard time believing you. And whether that's in your relationships or your marriage or your parenting or in your leadership in the marketplace, if you are inconsistent, it is going to create insecurity in the people that you are responsible to. Instead, be humble. Allow your humility to protect you from that inconsistency. And then when you really have a conviction, your yes will be yes and your no will be no. I have one more subject I want to touch on today, and it is the topic of what they're calling end-of-life care in Canada, which is certainly a euphemism at best, a lie at worst. I've heard a lot of acronyms for this. Right now, they're using the acronym MAID, which stands for Medical Assistance in Dying. What it really is doctor-assisted suicide. That is what it is. It's legal in Canada. There are currently 10 states in the United States and Washington, D.C., where this is also taking place. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It is doctors coming and or physicians coming and helping to end someone's life. And I want you to see Stephanie Green, who recently released a book on this. And, you know, so the question of like, why am I highlighting this woman and putting her on blast? It is because she has released this book. She has helped medically assist over 300 people in dying at this point, and she's written about it, which means she's profiting off of it. And I want you to hear a little bit of this interview. She's describing the first death that she had a hand in. And then we're going to look at some other quotes from her. This is Stephanie Green.
And Harvey was very much a self-made
Let me pull this up for you real quick.
man who knew exactly what he wanted. He had spent his life building what he wanted and creating family around him. For me, the most striking element of that experience is Harvey's death, right? I mean, that moment was the first time I'd witnessed this in this manner. And I was blown away at how supportive they were and how they all wanted to be touching him. They were all physically touching him. So I didn't direct them to do this. This was a natural instinct for this family. They're all touching him. They're all telling him they love him.
Why is she surprised at this natural instinct? You're killing their dad. You're killing their husband. And they all want to touch him. They want to be close to him. Yeah, because he's dying. It's sad. It's horrific.
Love him. They're whispering words to him. He's forehead to forehead with his wife. It was engrossing. It was mesmerizing. I was blown away.
Have you ever cried?
It was engrossing. It was mesmerizing. I was blown away. If you're not watching this on YouTube, her face like lights up. Here's a couple other quotes from Stephanie Green. She says, something profound is happening. I'm guiding it. I'm steering it. I'm making sure the right people are in the right place. And once I tell someone the heartbeat has stopped, I gently slip away. I'm guiding it. I'm steering it. I'm making sure the right people are in the right place. Before she had gone into the practice of medical assistance in dying, Stephanie Green was worked in the maternity ward. She delivered babies. She delivered over 1,500 babies in her career. And here she is comparing delivering a baby to ending someone's life. She says, I really find them very, very similar moments. At both deliveries, as I call them, I am invited into a most intimate moment in people's lives. I really find them very, very similar. She calls both of them deliveries. The problem with seeing them as similar is they're opposites. Like, if I were to say fill in the blank with opposites, up, you would say down. Birth, you would say death, right? Like these are opposites. They're not similar. And they're not both deliveries. Now, on the Christian worldview, you can make the case that death is a delivery into eternity, into your next life, and into what as Christians we would believe is actually your realist life. Now, this is becoming more and more common. I want to look at what is called the Hippocratic Oath. It's interesting. My oldest son, his girlfriend just graduated from high school, and she is in a medical program. And so one of the things that they did at the end of this ceremony is they all repeated the Hippocratic Oath. And we're going to look at the earliest version of this that has been translated from the Greek into English. And here in the third paragraph, it says, I will use those dietary regimens which will benefit my patients according to my greatest ability and judgment, and I will do no harm or injustice to them. And that's what people say about the Hippocratic Oath. Do no harm. The earliest version of this goes on to explain what that might mean. Neither will I administer a poison to anybody when asked to do so, nor will I suggest such a course. It actually goes on to say that they will never perform an abortion either, because the Hippocratic Oath is to do no harm. Here is what's happening in Canada right now. And Canada is usually just a few years ahead of us on some of these social issues. Is right now, in order to be in the MAID program, you have to have a physical illness that is incurable and basically insufferable. You have to give your own consent, but it is expanding. And in 2024, what's going to happen is that they are going to extend this not just to physical, but to mental health. So incurable mental health problems, which as you might know, are often very hard to diagnose and almost impossible with many mental health issues to determine whether or not they're going to be incurable. Some people have low-level anxiety their entire life. You could make the case that this is actually an incurable disease. It's just widening the frame for people who want this. Here's something that is really, really crazy. There's a lot of reporting on this, that 1/3 of Canadians are fine with prescribing assisted suicide for homelessness. Roughly the same number told a poll they were fine with approving MAID for someone whose only affliction was poverty. Okay, so now we're widening it out. It isn't just for people with incurable physical issues and diseases. It's now for people who have incurable mental health problems. It's now for people who are homeless. It's now for people whose only issue is that they're poor. And there's a huge push in Canada to make this where it's not just for adults, but for what they're calling mature minors. And the best I can tell, they never define mature minor by an age. It's more about, how cognizant they are and whether or not they seem like in control of their own faculties. And so now we are going to let adolescents, minors, be medically assisted in their suicide. Now, I don't like this term because one of the guiding principles for all of life is right in the 10 Commandments, you shall not murder. You cannot take someone else's life. Assisted suicide is an oxymoron. Assisted suicide is an antinomy. It's a paradox. It just doesn't make any sense at all. Suicide is killing yourself. And assisted suicide is murder. When you help kill somebody, it's murder. And even if someone is wanting to take their own life, if someone has the gun, locked and loaded and they're thinking about it, but I come and pull the trigger, I've murdered them. Yes, I have assisted in their desire to end their life, but now I've murdered them because I pulled that trigger. And so we have to start calling things what they actually are. And it is only in an atheistic framework that this makes any sense at all. In Psalm 139, the psalmist writes, "For you, God, created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made." Here's what we're doing. We're playing God. The earlier acronym wasn't medical assistance in death. The earlier one was doctor assisted death. That acronym spells dad. Like, how on the nose can you be? You think you're the Heavenly Father. You think you're God, and you are playing God. You are now deciding when people's lives are over. And people are actually writing about this in the national press in Canada, that there's good news. Because we're killing all of these people, organ transplants are more available. And so we're going to kill the people who are diseased and mentally unwell and homeless and the deplorables of society. We'll kill them, harvest their organs, and then we'll give them to all of the people who are put together and are, doing pretty well or are wealthy or well off. There is, in Canada, obviously, a universal healthcare system, and these people who are incurably diseased, whether that is in their mental health or their physical health, they cost the government tons of money to take care of these people. Well, one way to relieve their burden on the universal health system, kill them. These homeless people who the government is having to spend tons of money on, these impoverished people who are on all this welfare and taking up all the tax money, you know how you could relieve that burden? Help them die. This is, in any other scenario, eugenics. The carefully crafting of people to kill those people in order to better your population. It is evil. There are all these utilitarian arguments for it, which is just another case to be made that you have to have a transcendent grounding for your ethics, or else you end up with these absolutely insane policies that are going to continue to stretch out. They're going to let you kill people younger and younger and younger until medical assistance in dying and abortion are the two sides of the eugenics that just meet each other in the middle. And medical assistance in dying, medical murdering of people, it's going to be the safety net for the people that we don't want in society who don't get caught before they're born. That is where we're headed. And this is how the pagan world operated. The people who were others or who were burdens or who didn't fit the mold, they were either killed as kids or they were killed as adults. They were just offed. And look, life is incredibly hard sometimes. Incredibly hard sometimes. You know, someone who had a significantly difficult life was the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul, he was beaten to within an inch of his life multiple times. He was stoned almost to death multiple times. He was shipwrecked multiple times. He was imprisoned multiple times. He was run out of towns all of the time. He just lived this incredibly difficult life. And he wrote a letter while imprisoned to the church in Philippi. And I think what he said is so instructive for us. He says in verse 21, "For me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Now, if I live on in the flesh, this means fruitful work for me, and I don't know which one I should choose. I am torn between the two. I long to depart and to be with Christ, which is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary for your sake. Since I am persuaded of this, I know that I will remain and continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, and so that because of my coming to you again and boasting in Christ Jesus may abound." This is a guy who's like kind of at the end of himself. Now, for him, he does know right on the other side of life is his entrance into the kingdom of God. And he finally gets to see a Savior face to face. And all of his afflictions will be gone. That is the hope of having this transcendent belief in who Jesus is and what Jesus has done. But Paul's like, bro, I am tired. I am beat up. I'm imprisoned again. This is so tough. This is miserable. And I think it's very incorrect to read this as Paul being suicidal. Very incorrect. I think he's an old man who is just ready. He's like ready for Jesus to take him. I'm ready to go. And he is ready, but he's willing to stay because there is a purpose in the pain, because there is a reason and a significance in his suffering. And so he says, man, I don't even know some days. Like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to see Jesus, but I believe I still have work to do. And it is only when there is hope beyond this world that we can actually point people to a reason for their suffering. James, the brother of Jesus, said that as Christians, we can actually find joy in our suffering. Consider it all joy when you encounter trials of various kinds, trusting that this will produce endurance, which will lead you to the most significant life that you can possibly live. And so I have no doubt, and I think there are people, to give them the benefit of the doubt, who are compassionate on the other side of this argument, but their compassion is misplaced because in their worldview and in their frame, this life is all that there is. There is nothing next, and there is no ultimate purpose to life. And so if you're in a lot of pain, just end your life. But we are not made to play God, and it is a dangerous precedent to set, and you already see it happening. It is being used, whether you like it or not. I'm sure there's some examples of people who are wealthy and who are well off and are tired of being sick and tired. But for most people, this is becoming something that will be used as a form of eugenics to take out the people who are burdens on society or who don't fit the mold of what we think is the utopian of society we believe we can create because we think we're God. Medical assistance in death is murder. It is not compassion. It is not empathy. It is much closer to eugenics. And we should have our eyes open. We should know that this is here. It's probably not going anywhere, but we should have our thoughts collected when it comes time to take a stand. This has been the Clayton Tyner podcast, episode 19. Do not forget to subscribe, hit the bell notification. If this content has meant something to you, make sure you share it with your friends. You can follow me on Instagram or on Twitter at Clayton Tyner. That is Tyner, Tyner. I really am so thankful to everyone who's listening and who is supporting this channel. We'll be back next week with episode 20.